program designed to teach Christians sexual purity and its importance. All of this truly says one thing: your pedigree is worth nothing to God if God is worth nothing to you. Before I go further into my past, let me remind you of Ephesians 5:11 and 12. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them, for it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. With this in mind, I feel it inappropriate to give many details as to how I came upon my sexual addiction. I was established in my routine of sin in my early teens. This sin was that of nearly daily viewing pornography. How I came to this was not very different from most youths. I was regularly exposed to conversations about these things through school. One day, after a fight with a friend, I decided to get revenge by doing exactly what they had warned me never to do. This act of revenge threw me headlong off a cliff into my sin. There were really only two things that kept me from actually having sex. The first, I had no desire to socialize with girls because cooties can be fatal. The second, STDs. Neither of these protected me from myself, though. In January of 2010, at the beginning of the second semester of my junior year of high school, my English teacher rearranged the seating assignments. I was appalled because I had to surrender my seat in the back corner of the room and move up one whole seat. I no longer had the seat next to me for a footstool, and I was within talking distance of two other people. Worse still, the teacher then moved a girl into my old seat and put one next to me. My only solace was that I knew the two guys in the front row. Little did I know, that was only the beginning. You see, my two friends were friends with that thing taking up my footrest. They picked on her regularly, which was fine with me. At some point, I got roped into the picking too. It didn't take long for me to really enjoy picking on her, making her blush. If I picked on her enough, she would even laugh and smile. I got so excited to pick on her that I would sit and watch the door for her to come in so I could pick on her. Curiously enough, she was always looking at me too, which instantly made her smile at me. Let me tell you, I had her figured out. Not too long after school started our senior year, all of our friends began calling her Mrs. Bates. We even had a handwritten marriage agreement in the back of my math notebook. I still have it. We had been playing Mr. and Mrs. since early September at school, but it was Christmas night 2010 when I realized this was not just the silly thing high schoolers do, as I had previously convinced myself. Even though we lived so far apart and communicated only through text, this was the first time I saw her brokenhearted. I didn't even know it until after I told her, but this was the first night I told her I wanted her to be a part of my life for the rest of my life. This confession of love and desire drastically changed our friendship. The following Valentine's Day, 2011, was our first kiss. That kiss, however, changed things even more, though sadly it was really the beginning of something truly evil in my heart. Make no mistake, I do not regret that it was she I gave that kiss to. My regret is that my sexual addiction began poisoning what had once been a beautiful thing. We began dating shortly after graduation, even though our relationship was already well known to most people. With the dating came sexual involvement. Because we were now dating and sexually active, I quit viewing pornography so that I could say I was being faithful to her. But living an hour and a half away, only seeing each other on weekends, made me insist that something happened every time we got to spend time together. This often looked like getting ready late for parties, showing up earlier than was planned on for dates, or simply being deliberate and spending time together when we knew no one else would be home. Even though she expressed discomfort in how often this happened, my selfish desire for instant gratification left no room for her preferences. I would argue that we were already committed to getting married, and that dating was a formality for everyone else's sake. This argument, however, was horribly selfish, truly only focused on one thing: my sexual addiction and newfound source for gratification. We were married March 2nd, 2013. We initially settled down near my hometown. At the time, neither of us had jobs, although she had worked for several months prior saving up money. It was not until this money was largely spent that I got a job. The job I had paid the bills, barely, but it did not provide enough for the family we dreamed of having, nor did it have room for improvement. This, as well as other factors we had made no plans for, is just one example of my selfishness in our marriage. For me, the most important part of our marriage was the guaranteed gratification. Even though I was not totally apathetic toward my wife and tried my best to make her happy, my aim was always to get her into the bedroom with me. After the first year and a half of our marriage, we had to move. What income I had was not enough, and winter was coming. We moved into a mobile home in a trailer park near her family. Even though the overall cost of living was about the same, being in town made it much easier for both of us to work. She began working in the daycare of her parents' gym. I went to work for their contractor building their new house. Eventually, she transitioned into her stepfather's doctor's office. Contrarily, due to issues with coworkers and my employer, I quit my job. With the promise of a job not working out as hoped, combined with knowing very few people in the area and knowing even less about the area, I began slipping into depression. I began feeling worthless and pointless as a husband. And my selfishness, I blamed it on my wife for working enough to provide for both of us. I blamed her for not pushing me to prove myself and not trusting me to. Truthfully, I was doing nothing, nor had I done anything in the past to prove that I was capable and trustworthy. My self-pity only proved me more and more unreliable. One thing that did not change during these several months of depression, I still expected gratification at my convenience. Finally, after about 7 months of doing virtually nothing but playing video games, often getting so mad I would yell and curse at no one, although she heard all of it, I got another job. It took 2 tries through a staffing agency, but in November of 2015, I found a factory job nearby that paid decent. This meant people would finally stop nagging me about work. I could prove myself to be a less than worthless husband, and my wife would be so proud of me she would throw herself at me in bed. This, however, was far from the case. Even though we continued living together, our marriage was far from okay. Because of my sexual addiction, laziness, my demanding, controlling nature, and not truly caring for her, our marriage was doomed to fail. I could see it coming, but my only answer to prevent it was more sex. It was in these last days that she said something to me, something I still struggle with, because it was completely true, and I couldn't deny it even if I wanted to. Maybe, she said, if you had read your Bible more, none of this would have happened. And then it happened. In 3 days, my world ended. Even though I'd heard it said that you never forget your first kiss, nobody warned me about your last kiss. This came from me on Saturday, July 23rd, 2016. The things that happened on this day are too painful to walk through tonight, but it was one of the first times I recognized God's sovereignty. I know this because I should either be in jail or dead right now, because of my own actions. The next 2 days absolutely destroyed me. Sunday, July 24th, I sat with my parents and her stepfather and explained all that I could leading up to Saturday. I begged for any help or advice or wisdom they could offer me. I knew I had failed, the marriage was shattered, and I was helpless. Monday, when I got home from work, almost all of my wife's belongings had been moved out. I can't even begin to put words to what I felt. All I can say is I ended up doubled over the toilet in such pain, feeling as though I had been literally torn in two, begging God to let me die. Have you ever seen a house in a mudslide or collapsed in a sinkhole? This is what I used to imagine when I would read Matthew 7:26 and 27. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the wind blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. What I had never imagined was how my marriage would end up the same way. That whole pedigree I opened with, proof of my wickedly proud foolishness. As the divorce process began, I began attending church with my brother. I remember introducing myself on Sunday morning, as it is a very small church compared to Faith. And I briefly stated I was attending because I was getting divorced and I had nowhere else to go. I quite literally had lived out Proverbs 5:12 through 14. And you say, how I hated discipline and my heart despised reproof. I did not listen to the voice of my teachers or incline my ear to my instructors. I am at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. My first priority, of course, was how to get her back without dying or going to jail. I knew God was the only possible answer to that equation. I spent the first several weeks of our separation sleeping on the couch, reading my Bible, and praying furiously. Both my brother, a deacon in his church, and one of the elders in his church asked me the same questions. Are you saved, and how do you know? I had no answer for either question. They both sent me to the book of 1 John. It did not take long for me to figure out that I was not even pretending to be saved. This led me to furiously searching for how to change that, as well as how to fix my marriage. And after a few weeks of reading around the New Testament, I turned to Romans. Truthfully, I had been avoiding it because I had some idea of what was in it. I also knew it was going to hurt. I wasn't wrong. It took me about 6 hours to read the first 10 or 12 chapters. By the time God was done, I was left with one simple prayer. God, I've got nothing. If I'm ever going to do anything right, you have to help me. I was finally willing to confess my sin and admit my need for God's authority in my life. Fast forwarding through the next several months, the divorce was finalized on December 14th. I was attending every service my church had, regularly talking with the elders, and reading my Bible furiously, praying that God would show me how to get her back. The New Year's after the divorce, God gave me a clear directive. On a Wednesday night class, we went through Psalm 46. Verse 10 said exactly what I wanted, what I needed, but didn't want to hear. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. For those of you who knew me growing up, will gladly agree with the fact that I have a rather abysmal record of doing what I'm told the first time. Fortunately, a restraining order gave me extra motivation not to be an idiot this time. So instead, I sat and prayed constantly that God would show me what to do to get her back. Every time I prayed, I got the same answer. Be still and know that I am God. Those of you who know me now have probably figured out that being still is not what I'm known for. Patience is certainly not my strong suit. As the new year began, I adopted a plan to read the Bible through in a year. My wife's words of, if you'd read your Bible more, still ringing in my ears. However, my constant nagging God to give my wife back did not help my growth as a Christian. All it did was cause me to live, constantly expecting her to come back any day. Not surprisingly, this led to incredible frustration with God and my circumstances. This was compounded by two major factors. First being that I was geographically isolated from my church, living almost an hour away from anybody that I knew were Christians. Second, that meant I had no one to hold me accountable when I was home alone. I spent the anniversary of our separation at my parents' house, not trusting myself to be alone. At one point that day, I was outside, working furiously, trying to work so hard I didn't have to think. My mom came out and asked me what I was doing, at which point I lost what little composure I had left and said, "I don't know, Mom." Frankly, I was despairing in being alone, being forced away from my life, and God not bringing her back. As I slid into depression once again, my Bible reading faded, leaving me with more and more time to think. My internet usage also went up, trying to distract myself with entertainment and video games. Matthew 12, verses 43 through 45 says, "When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, it passes through waterless places seeking rest, but finds none. Then it says, 'I will return to my house from which I came.' And when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings with it 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there. And the last state of that person is worse than the first. So it will be with this evil generation. My demons were returning." By early fall, my Bible was once again gathering dust, and I was not just looking to entertainment or video games for comfort. My unsated, uncontrolled desire for gratification pulled me back into my addictions. This time around, though, I lived alone and had no one who was a risk of finding me out. No one but God, that is. My church attendance was dropping and not going unnoticed. I knew there was a verse somewhere that said what is done in the darkness will be brought to the light. Finally, after an unspeakably dark weekend, Monday, February 26, 2018, I emailed the elders at my church. I figured that it was better to be brought to the light in a controlled environment rather than forcefully exposed. We met Wednesday night to discuss what needed to be done. Because of the small size of the church and the intensity of my sins, they determined that I needed radical help. They gently asked me to consider the idea of moving to a church-based residential counseling program. I asked them if they had an application with them. That was the beginning of me coming to Bethany Farms. Let's be clear though, I didn't just walk right into the farm. Satan was not about to let me go easily. However, my elders required that I disconnect my internet, lose my smartphone, meet with them every Sunday after church, and have a midweek phone conversation. Even though I was largely cut off from pornography, my mind was still entrenched. One of the elders even gave me a book to read called Finally Free, but it didn't have any quick fixes in it, so it too gathered dust. Because of my still chronic sin, I was not sure I would even make it here. I even had the thought come to mind that God had predestined me to be a failure statistic. When I finished my application in late April, I was told it would be August before I came here. God showed his sovereignty to me again, reminding me that he was in control. Tuesday, June 11th, a little old lady named Rachel knocked on the door of my trailer. I had already told my landlady that I was planning to move, so she was passing word around before I even knew it. Rachel was living with her son across the trailer park, but wanted her own space. Because I was not planning to sell until later in July, I wrote her number down and told her I'd call her first when I was ready. Wednesday, I grabbed my Kindle and went to Burger King to borrow some Wi-Fi and eat a Whopper. To my surprise, there awaited in my email a message from Greg sent Monday, informing me that a position had opened up unexpectedly and I could be here as soon as Sunday. All of a sudden, 2 months was 2 weeks, in which my trailer was miraculously sold by a buyer God provided. All of my stuff was moved into a storage unit near my parents, and bam, here I am. I don't know what others' first week is like, but mine was definitely not what I expected. I imagined it would be lots of counseling, constant Bible study, and a little work. I was definitely not expecting to be doing foundation work, pouring concrete, laying out framing, or actually framing and setting trusses by the end of week 1. This, however, was not the only surprise. Only a couple weeks into the program, we began reading through Finally Free as a part of my counseling. God was again showing his sovereignty, using the very book that my church had given me for counseling literature. It took several weeks before God revealed to me some very important things. The most important was that all this time, my view was totally off. I had been worshiping God because I wanted him to bring my wife home. I had to learn that I must worship God, period. Whether married or divorced, as a child of God, it is my purpose above all else to worship him. I also learned that my approach to sin was way off. I thought I could fight the temptation on my own, that I had to resist it to please God. Though this is not untrue, I was relying purely on my own strength. This is why I failed so much. 1 Corinthians 10:13 radically changed that for me. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it. Simply put, I had never truly trusted in God to carry me through temptation. God's promised faithfulness is the answer to any sin. He has given his word that there's a way to endure anything because he will never let us be forced to sin. With this revelation, my attitude towards sin moved from one of fear that it might destroy me to a confidence in the knowledge of the promise of God's grace and forgiveness. This also brought about peace of mind. I have learned that even though I failed as a husband, God still has use of me just as I am. After all, he has promised in Romans 8:28 and 29, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. I had been here for a little over 2 months when we first studied 1 Corinthians 13 in class. If anyone doesn't recognize this chapter, it is where Paul clearly defines perfect love. Until this point, even though I knew I had not been a Christian through my marriage, I had been selfish and treated my wife so wrongly, I was still convinced that I had loved her the whole time. After all, I had said it countless times and meant it too. But when I really dug into what it means to love, God revealed how sinfully wrong I had been. 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. And it does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I was not patient, which led to a lack of kindness. I was envious of her in many ways, as well as boasting in her, which only fueled my idolatry of her, believing she was totally perfect even though I wasn't getting what I wanted. I was being very rude and arrogant because I was always insisting on my own way. In all these things, I was rejoicing in wrongdoing and had no truth to rejoice in. I didn't bear with her as the weaker vessel, believe her to be more precious than myself, hope to be a godly husband and lead a godly life, nor endure anything that wasn't obviously beneficial to me. Where did this leave me? I was smitten, head over heels, in love, Twitter-pated, a hopeless romantic, and anything else you could come up with. I had said the words, "I love you," thousands of times. I had done nice things, spoiled her, and put on a good show. But none of it mattered. In 6 years, having never known what love really was, I never loved her. I had yet to experience God's love, so I could not love her. I lied to her for years, yet was so blind even I believed my lie. There have been many, many lessons learned in my short time here, but this was one of the hardest ones. At the same time, this was an incredible reminder of God's grace and complete forgiveness of sin. Obviously, this is not a realization I made on my own. I had tons of support from my home church in Ohio. It was their help, both spiritually and financially, that helped me make it here. Here wouldn't be here if Faith Church weren't here to support Bethany Farms. There's also all the volunteers who come out and give their time to us on the farm. They may not be counselors on paper, but their friendship and encouragement is truly invaluable. Even the other guys in the program helped me learn about myself in areas I needed to grow. Greg, Faith Church put you in charge of this program. When I came here, I was not expecting the director of the program to only be a couple years older than me. But the wisdom you share with us, the time you spend talking to us as a friend, and the sacrifices you make for us, thank you so much for being an example of sacrificial love. Your leadership and example have truly been a blessing to me. Matt, Joe, you got stuck in a room with me every week for 7.5 months. As if that wasn't enough, you also talked to me throughout the week all of that time. You helped me. You listened to me. You pushed me. Your influence in my life has been incredibly beneficial. Thank you so much for the time and sacrifices you have made on my behalf, even still. There is much of my life that is still unknown, but what is now known to me is God's love, God's faithfulness, and God's forgiveness. Truly, there is nothing in life that matters more than these. I don't know what trials to expect or when, but I know God's promise in Psalm 139:16 that your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when yet there was none of them. With the knowledge of God's faithfulness, His promise to use all things for good, and the assurance that He has a definite plan for me, I know that married or divorced, my life is to be lived in such a way as to give God praise in any adversity. Trials have come. Trials still exist, and new trials will arise. But I have a hope in something far greater than myself. I have the promised peace of God through faith in Jesus. After all, this life is but a breath on the morning air. Thank you.